Hi, it's Chris Titley, and on today's episode of Scoreboard, the podcast, I'm joined by Rohan Taylor, head coach of the Australian swim team, the Dolphins. Rohan, thank you so much for being part of this series.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Rohan, we're sitting here on Monday morning, the 12th of May. How's your Monday started so far?
Well, I was up in Cairns at the moment. I've got two of our performance coaches running their programs up here. It's supposed to be warm weather camp, but in Cairns at the moment it's pissing down rain, and it's probably the same, I think, in Brisbane. But we have programs all around the country. Actually, we have one in Thailand and one in Dubai as well. So they tend to chase a little bit of warm weather in this May period. So we'll have a few more later in the year later in the month going to Darwin. But I try to get around to the different programs. I'll be going to Canberra, which is kind of from here tomorrow. I'll be down in Canberra, and then into Sydney for a competition in Sydney. So just at the moment, we're about 4.5 weeks out of our trials. And this is kind of where I get around to the different performance programs where our athletes that, are pretty much our national team athletes train, just in their environments as they kind of do their final touches for the trials, and just making sure, they've got all the resources and support they need. And it's building those relationships for when I pull the team together after our trials in June.
Rohan, we're in 2025, a year off the Olympics and 3 years out to LA. Is everything kind of planned out for 4 years leading up to LA?
Yeah, we're pretty well planned. The planning starts. Unfortunately, you start doing things prior to the Paris Olympics. You start looking ahead. Kind of the operational space that we live in high performance leadership is you're always looking at the next horizon, and you have to. We had to get our staging camp already in San Diego for LA. We've been making visits last year to get secure because everybody's trying to do the same thing, trying to get the facility. And we have a large team, so we need a certain facility spaces. It's not a lot of facilities that can hold us. We need 250-meter pools. So a lot of that logistical stuff was done leading into Paris. And of course, the way that the international performance calendar sets itself out, it kind of tells you what you're going to be doing. We knew World Championships are in Singapore. We know what kind of competitions. And so we're spending our own, we're working on today, but we're also working on tomorrow. So I've got a meeting off the back of this podcast today, which will be about the Singapore World Championships, but we'll also discuss Commonwealth Games and Pan Pacs next year because we're already building that campaign. So it's never stopping. But to answer your question, I think coming off of Paris was it was a rushed 3 years off the back of COVID. Really didn't have a chance to take a breath. There was a lot of letdown in that back half of 2024, and it was a real emotional struggle, to be honest, to just pull myself out of that hole and really get excited about LA. And there's always a moment in time where it just you finally let go of the past and you're into the future. January started out with a coaching workshop and a lot of conversations about what we think we can achieve in LA and what we need to put in place to do that. So all of a sudden it just shifts your mindset. So that's where we are right now, pure LA preparation.
When you look at LA and you look at a campaign or an Olympic campaign, when you're planning, do you have a goal? Do you have some sort of idea about what success looks like, or is it a little bit out of your control?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We talk about what success looks like, and we did had a national event camp after the coaches workshop where we bring about 90 to 100 athletes together, and that's effectively your team and then the broader group that's knocking on the door to make the team. You're trying to cover everybody. And effectively it was setting the scene for LA, and we basically talked to them about what success will look like in LA from a performance point of view. And we know that so we select our trials meet. We select our team around 5 to 6 weeks before the international competition. So Olympics, we're talking about Olympics here, but any other like World Championships, it'll be 5 weeks before Worlds. And so they swim top 8 in the time in the world, which is a very strong standard. But statistically, 90% of all the medals won at international competitions come from the top 8 athletes ranked. In fact, 80% come from the top 5. So if you're not in that, this is just only two medals in Paris. Individual medals came from outside the top 8. So all of the medals were won effectively in that space. So first thing is picking the team. So they got to perform well there. So what success looks like for us is being able to repeat those performances 5 or 6 weeks later. When we've done that really well, Fukuoka in 2023, we won the meet, the medal count. We won the gold medals. We were 73% of our swims were either equal or faster. So we moved our trials to 5 weeks because we weren't getting that kind of conversion back historically. We were only getting 28 to 32% of our swims were improved or the same. So that's why we made the shift to try to capture that performances. So we basically talked about what does multiple peaking and repeatability look like. So that's now what we're working on. So it's exposure to more competitions like World Cups coming up, 3 meets in a row, learning how to repeat performances, getting other sports in. We had Tony Gollan, who's a great Brisbane trainer, come in and talk to us about horse training and how he gets peaks every 4 weeks. We're just trying to explore what is it that we need to do. We know what success looks like when it happens, but how do you design the success? How do you make those athletes prepare? So that's one part of it. That's performance. And then just quickly to answer the other question, from a campaign delivery. So what did we learn in Paris? What worked well? What didn't? Well, we know in Paris that the buses were really hit or miss. Our athletes were spending a lot of time on the buses. They're traveling a lot. The villages, the AOC Olympic Committee, the Australian Olympic Committee made our village environment unbelievable, first class. But once you walk out of that space, you're exposed to a broader environment. So a lot of the feedback was that other countries had spent time outside the village in hotels close to the pool to minimize travel and to have a more controlled environment. And they did a bit of a combination. So we're now looking at that as a strategy. So we're thinking about those things to try to address some of the barriers that popped up, like an hour on a bus that didn't have air conditioning, back and forth. And, there was still a lot of illness going around. A lot of our team caught, different illnesses. So when you're in that kind of public space, so it's about how do we look at LA and what's happening in the village, and then what are the alternative opportunities for that. So it's building a campaign that's going to give us the best chance to repeat our performances because we know we selected the right team. So we kind of have those clear things, and there's things you can't avoid. There's injury, illness, and stuff like that you can't avoid. But what can we control? And that's what we're working on right now. We'll go to World Championships, we'll go to other meets and practice that, and we'll ask questions after. Did that work? Didn't that work? And those are the things we're doing on a regular basis.
Is it also a little bit trying to I suppose you got this calm before the storm when the Olympics happens, and there's so much happening in those weeks during the Olympics, from no air conditioning on the bus, etc., to basically going, right, we're prepared for A, B, C, D. We've done the best. We've picked the right hotel. We've picked the right beds, etc. The food, everything kind of goes to plan. And yes, there'll be some variables, but we've tried to minimize those variables.
Absolutely. And I think what we we had a team of 42 at the Olympics in Paris, but we only had 4 athletes who had ever been to an Olympics where there was crowds and actually freedom, because Tokyo was completely bubbled. So some of those things were a surprise to some athletes. I've been to a number of them, and how do you prepare them for that? Because you can't replicate that environment. And so that's really what we're looking at now. Because the reality is that we did have a lot of athletes who were able to cope with it. So so what did they do? How did they cope, and how did their coaches prepare them for that? So that's what we're trying to do. How do we replicate and prepare people to go, at the end of the day, it is what it is. These are the controllable things you have. So having those conversations, walking out into a crowd of 17,500 people in Paris screaming because Leon Marchand's in the block next to you, and you're going, I've never experienced this before. You can't replicate. It's going to be 38,000 in LA.
Wow. And then an American swimmer comes out and just goes, woo.
Oh, it's going to go through the roof. So, and we're not going to avoid that. It's going to be fun, and we want to embrace that. But we don't have any way of replicating it. That's the thing. We can't kind of create a 38,000, unless we ask an AFL game or an NRL game can we all go out in the middle of the field and drop a pool in and do a quick session in front of
what I mean? Not the worst idea, but yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah. These are the things we're thinking about. We're trying to come up with, so there is no surprises. And I mean, like I said, there's athletes that absolutely didn't phase them one bit. They just performed. We want to get the numbers up as much as we can, and it's exciting. Like we can see it very clearly, and we're very confident that we've got we'll pick the right team. It's also just creating environments and training environments. Talking to a coach today, just on pool deck this morning, about how do you make your training sessions more, put more pressure on them to execute, the things they need to do. Like that's an influential thing you can do. You can just step back and let them train, or you can really put in place things that are really going to challenge them, that get them conditioned to, anything that might happen. You can connect that to the environment that you're going into, and that's a bit of the art of the coaching and putting an environment together like that.
Yeah, Rohan, just touching on that from an individual athlete point of view within the team. Yeah, 3 years out, there's races that it's not the Olympic final, etc. How do you go about them saying, like, guys, you got to keep being ready for everything and keep giving your best performance, I suppose. And then, so when it comes to sort of being at your best when your best is needed, it's sort of second nature.
Yeah, well, so we talk about so everything we do, like the World Championships, is a preparation for LA. Everything's about, we just say everything we're doing now is about getting ready for that performance in LA. So you need to be thinking on that front. And so when you go into World Championships coming up, it's like, this is a practice run for how you're going to cope with heat semifinals and for LA. Because what we do know is that we have limited opportunities to practice that. And so every opportunity has to be a practice for that moment in the future. And we're not shy away from it. This is about LA. And this is where you need to take risks now and learn as much as you can. And we talk about other sports where, you talk about like a 50 games of AFL football or whatever, where they say that's around after 50, they're really familiar with everything and they can operate a little bit more automated. Well, swimming, 50 international competitions isn't going to come around before that. But we do know if we expose them to World Cups and other things, we can accumulate a lot of races, but they need to be applying exactly the purpose why they're doing it. So we can bring them to that, but they've got to actually see this is practice. And I think that's the conversations we have with the athletes and coaches, that every campaign, when I say campaign, I'm talking about if we bring the team together for a camp, it's a campaign, a World Cup international competition exposure, anything that's led by us, and we bring them in and they come into the Dolphins, we call it the Dolphins environment, where they become, under that banner, that's a campaign. And then we immediately talk about it being an LA campaign, right? So that's kind of how we get the environment set for them. And obviously that's their home programs where that's where the majority of the work's done. But we're trying to, enhance as much as we can.
And just on that campaign, you've got various coaches and their different styles, and various individuals and their different styles. And with that comes ego and different, I suppose, ways of thinking. How do you, at the top, kind of manage all that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was on the national team for a long time myself, and worked under Don Talbot and Alan Thompson and Lee Nugent and Greg Hodge for a short period of time. Those are the guys that led the team, and so I learned a lot from them. But I was always in that this is about me. So for me, I have the existing relationships with these coaches because I've been on teams. Majority of them, some of them are new, but I know them pretty well. And moving into the position where I need to, create unity, I need to protect and support that individualism, because that's the better they do, the better we do. So it's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle, and it's a balance of what we really put, I guess, how we control. I don't want to say control the egos, but how we make sure that everybody buys in is that when you come into the Dolphins team, you're standing on the shoulders of 100+ years of tradition. We've been successful since Freddie Lane in 1900 won a gold medal in the River Seine in Paris, all the way through to the Don Frasers, the Conrads, all the way through to Perkins and Thorpe, and they have a responsibility, and the coaches as well. The coaches that I was exposed to early on, the Don Talbots, your Bill Sweetnams, your Mr. Carews, and Doug Frost, and you go through. These are coaches who coached gold medalists. They were coaches of. So that's the standards that's set. And so, but they were also all about, Australia and representing Australia. So we just keep that going, that you have a responsibility. I will support you in your preparations, but you need to support that this is the green and gold. And that's that's why I invest a lot of time in going around and spending time with them on pool deck. That's why I bring coaches together twice a year and in a weekend, building relationships, workshops while we run event camps to kind of, invest in, I would call, water the garden of that legacy and culture. So when they come in, I was conditioned and upskilled by the coaches before me. They were the ones that went in, and the head coaches, and Don Talbot was very autocratic and said, this is a standard. You need to behave this way. You need to do, your athletes need to do this. And it was the way it was. Now it's, how do you do that in a modern way? You empower them, you give them what they need, and you invest in them, and you show them respect, but in return, so I've had to learn to have some sit down conversations, and just ask for them to support what we're putting in place, because they'll benefit. And it comes down to the relationship building. I can't go past that, and the respect that the mutual respect. So I feel it's in a good place at the moment, and it's been, we've got some great world-class coaches, as we've seen, and then they create environments where these athletes can thrive, which is what it's all about.
And Rohan, you touched on the word culture. Does people that come into the squad know of the values, the principles, the history, that I suppose to adhere to all that, as opposed to, doing their own little swim and wherever they are, and then they sort of come in and you're like, hold on a second, we need to lift here.
Absolutely. No, we spend a lot of time talking, at the beginning of every campaign activity. So whether it's a camp or we go into staging, we run, we have an orientation day before we go away, and we talk about that. The three key things they need to, lead yourself, lead your teammates, lead your culture. We have a conversation about what that is. A lot of the experienced athletes share what that looks like to them. And then that sets the scene. And then what we do is when they come into team, we've got, we have a traveling museum that's a team room with images and word phrases that have been come up by the athletes now or in the past. And we just embrace that, and we just keep the theme going. That's something that's been really worked on since, before my time, when Jocko Verhaeren came in, and we, post London, there was a lot of that conversation about what is it that's missing within the team culture. And it really was embracing the history and legacy of the Dolphins. I think that kind of just maybe lost a bit of that touch, and we needed to make sure. So I bring in alumni during staging, either on video or they come personally in to spend time. I've got Jeff Hugel will be coming into camp with us in Singapore, and be talking to the team about his time and experiences. We do a gold cap presentation, which is a ceremony, a traditional ceremony we do when we're in camp, where we everybody gets their caps. Everybody gets a number when they make the team. So you're numbered from, number one was Freddie Lane, and, we're up to number 860, I think. So there's only been 860 representatives across the world, the senior benchmark meets. We do the same with coaches. They get a coaching number and a ring. So we've got about 120 coaches that have represented Australia on the national team since 1948, when it officially started having coaches. So we do a ceremony where there's any rookies, they get their pin numbers and they get celebrated, but everybody gets their gold cap handed to them, which is their name on the cap for that meet. You can only wear a gold cap if you're a Dolphin. You'll see if there's other teams traveling, they wear green caps. So we have this real tradition around that. So we spend a bit of time doing those things to really remind people. So if you're new coming into the team, you're going to get influenced by that. And it's, a few little sugar hit videos, a bit of medleys. And I've got a documentary, a cameraman that's been following us around for a long time that makes videos for us and puts things together when we're looking for themes and things. So we just try to do as much as we can without overwhelming them, that they're part of something greater than themselves.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And it's a very individual sport, apart from the relays, I suppose. So there's a lot of, very highly competitive people and individual, then bringing them into that team environment. And from when you first started coaching, there's a different world we live in regards to social media and Instagram, et cetera, and people are transparent and content. How do you kind of keep an eye on that and making sure that the values and principles are adhered to?
Yeah, it's funny. I'll give you a funny story, and I won't use names because I don't want them. But we were in Budapest for World Championships, and obviously I've got somebody scanning social media, like our media person. I don't. I've got LinkedIn. That's the only thing. But I don't like. I don't want to know unless I need to know. I don't want to know. It's kind of the thing. But when they get brought to my attention, I address them like, this situation. So we're in Budapest. We're at the World Championships, and a couple of the athletes did a selfie photo, and they had the middle finger up like that, but they were wearing team gear. And it was just a bit of a laugh, like whatever. And it got brought to me, and I'm like, okay. So, I brought them in and said, are you, and they were like, so they'd already deleted. They were devastated that they'd done it. And I said, I just had a chat with them. I was like, fine about it. I was saying, do you understand that, like, how that looks? You're wearing the uniform that represents all of us. And they go, yeah, we know. And I said, and I jokingly said, well, if you want to do that to Swimming Australia, just come to me personally, just do it to my face. Like, I was like trying to make them realize that you're actually doing this to this is how it could be perceived. And it was all about their intentions versus what it can be taken in perceptions. I'm not a social media expert. So for me, I just dealt with the situation there. But we do have social media people come in when we run the event camps. We had someone come in recently and talk to them about, kind of like the reality of when you put stuff online or, for instance, like, did you know that I didn't know this, that Snapchat, the guy asked a question, do you think when your Snapchat disappears that it disappears? And they're like, yeah. And he's like, no, it doesn't.
It's in the cloud.
He said, I can go buy all of your Snapchat photos from Snapchat. And then he goes, actually, I bought a few of you guys in the room, and they all went like this. And he goes, no, I'm just kidding. He goes, just kidding, but I could have. He said, so you need to understand. And he just talked about like the realities. And also he has a company, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's a company that actually helps come in and support people who are getting bullied online. And, there's ways of protecting yourself. But I think they're so much more savvy now than I could ever And so I think there was a time I believe when it really exploded that's when trouble was happening a lot, and I think they're much more savvy now and much more experienced at how they do it. I know a lot of our athletes are really, really good at utilizing social media to really drive and I think that's fantastic. We really don't have, really, knock on wood, we really haven't had much issues for a period of time that I can recall. Little things, but they're, like I said, the story I was told was really just they're having fun, and I kind of just had to say, oh, maybe that's not, this is what it could look like, but that's not kind of my area, to be honest. I just, if there's a problem, somebody will come to me and we'll deal with it. But we've got a pretty, our problems are pretty light on, to be honest. The big thing, Chris, is you've got a group of individuals that come together and have to be teammates when they're competing against each other 3 weeks before, trying to beat each other. We can't expect them all to be mates, but what we can do is expect them to be respectful and supportive of each other's endeavors to perform. And that's that's the thing I hold up. We're not trying to create buddies and friends on teams. If that happens, that's great, but it's really about, you got to respect each other. It's the same with the coaches, and that's why I invest a lot of time in building relationships with them.
When you talk about building relationships, it must be a little bit difficult as you see these people, you see their personalities, and you become quite close to them, and you probably almost to the point become friends with them to a degree. Can you talk about that grey area?
Yeah, look, I'd say I started as friends with all of them before I moved into this role, so it's been a bit of a separation of that. I don't get invited to a lot of the social gatherings at different times, but it's a bit of a joke, running joke. But I tend to remove myself away to give them, because I know what it was like. They want to have a conversation or whatever. But I have closer relationships with some of the coaches just formed from years of being on team with them, but I really present myself as someone who's there to listen and support and not judge. Some that I'm new relationships with, I got to spend a bit more time getting their trust, and that means that I have to share my story. That I don't have to. It means that's what I do. I share my story. I've been through the ringer myself as a coach in living a high performance lifestyle. So having plenty of time away from my family and going through all the stress and anxieties that come with the job, and working on myself and finding ways to cope with it. and I want to share that story because they're all going through it. And that's where I kind of focus in on. So when it comes to being able to have a challenging conversation with them, I obviously it depends on the personality. Some you can just tell them straight up, and some you just it's like athletes. It's very similar.
Yeah, a lot of empathy, I suppose, and every situation is different. Sometimes you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. When I talk to a couple of CEOs, they talk about innovation, they talk about innovate or die, etc. When it comes to swimming, there's lots of data, lots of tech, lots of ways you can dress, lots of things like that. How do you go about absorbing all that, and I suppose, and coming to a conclusion that this is the way forward to shave that millisecond off?
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Like, it's I'll go back to when I was coaching on pool deck. Like, I had someone that worked with me in a performance consultant role, a guy named Jeremy Oliver, who is now heading high performance at Aston Villa. And Jeremy was doing S&C and stuff with me, but he was like my filter, right? So I love shiny objects. Well, what's that over there? What's that? And he taught me as a young coach that I needed to first understand if that was effective information. So this is prior to big data coming in. We're talking about like early 2000s. Is it going to be effective? I need to understand it. And then the second thing is it going to be efficient for me to use? So for instance, as a coach, the best coaches in the world, it's their intuitiveness and their eyes and their relationships and them being present in watching the athletes train and being engaged. If you're over here fiddling around with something to get some data that you actually already know because you see it, it's about how do I get that information that comes to me to help support my decision making. So everything I filtered through was like, is this supporting what I see, or is it adding to that? Is it amplifying my coaching? We use the word, does it amplify my skill sets? So data for me coming in, I don't look at it. I look at it and just try to cherry pick the things that I think are going to help me make better decisions, more informed decisions or better interventions. And so what's been interesting is you've got the sports science, the people that are gathering the information, the experts that understand it. And then the coaches over here who are like stopwatch, eyes on the pool. That's all I need.
Clipboard.
They're so valuable in what they can give to the coach that we've been working collaboratively on how to enhance and influence the coach and what I call amplify the coach, not replace them. So this is where data we're getting more and more of it being influential. Race analysis, post-race, the breakdown and how we get that information is really the most important piece of data that I think. And that is the one that determines what your breakdown of your race was, where your strengths, where your areas of fall off were, and then comparing it to the other people you're competing against, whether it be domestically or internationally, where are they better than you? And where can you then go back to the training environment and improve in those areas so you get a greater outcome the next time you compete? It's the breakdown of that, and then it's the prescription of the training environment and the prescribing and the periodization of that. That is the area where the coaches intuitively are very good at that. But if you can give them more information, more focal points, so that they're not wasting time, they're doing things that are really specific. And I spent some time talking to Locke Penfold from Melbourne Storm, just about, I've got to know Locke, and we just talked about just the way that they train at another level, Storm. And, that's obvious, but it's the detail of making sure the training's so hard and, standards, but specificity and accountability so that when they get to a game, and I'm summarizing my thoughts from what the conversation, but in swimming, I see too much just general stuff being done. It's like, what's the purpose of this? Cam McAvoy is training so specifically that everything he does is timed, measured, and accountable to the goal that he's trying to achieve. So it's really narrowed down. And it's like, how do you spread that across a 400 freestyler like an Ariane Titmus and they did that. They took all the race data and they made her training so purposeful. So to me, it's those really smart people with all that knowledge coming in and amplifying the coach as they plan the athlete's program and then help them make those decisions like, that's right, that's going to shift the dial, that's not going to do it. And that's where we're at the moment. I think that's one of our point of differences globally is what we really collaborate well with the experts around. And the coaches are getting better and better at accepting the data in, but they're filtering it through, will this make my program better? And is it easy to accept? Or do I have to put my watch down and go over to a computer? Well, we don't want them doing that because that takes them away from where they're their best.
When it comes to high performance and touching on that topic, do you, kind of using a swimming analogy here, do you swim your own race, or do you peek over and have a look at what other groups are doing and other nations are doing in regards to tech and innovation and maybe some different ways of doing things?
Oh, you definitely look at what others are doing, and you try to, because you got to try to beat them. So you got to understand what they're doing and how they're doing it well, and then you've got to then design an environment that's going to counter that, and the training prescriptions and those types of things and all the interventions that you need. When it comes to the race plan, I think if you're number one in the world and you're winning, your race plan stays pretty consistent. If you're number two and you're trying to beat number one or three, then you've got to actually adjust the way that you race. And you might need to do it, within the competition. The reason the Americans are so good is they compete a lot in college swimming, and they compete a lot, and they try different things, and they have a lot of variety, so they can actually pivot depending on how the race is going. They have got confidence to do that. We're probably learning to do that. But again, you need to race a lot more, as I said, getting those races under your belt to try different things. And so that's where we want to expose our athletes. So that gives them a few different bows to their string. So they might have race plan A, but B, if this goes this way, if somebody kind of goes out really fast, do you respond to that, or do you stick with your plan? Depending, if you know that athlete dies at the end of the race, then you're confident you'll get them at the end. It's just those little things like that.
And touching on the NCAA, you've worked in America, and a little twang in your voice. I'm curious to know your interest in swimming, where that came from.
Well, it's I'll give you the short version of the story. I was born in Melbourne. We left when I was 18 months. My dad managed the phosphate mining. Was a personnel manager for phosphate at Nauru. I lived on Nauru Island till I was 5. Then I went to Hong Kong. He got a job with a U.S. pharmaceutical company. I was in Hong Kong. Started swimming there as a tacker, and then went to the U.S. and I got into competitive swimming in the U.S. and basically went through living in California, went through to college, went to university, and then off the back of that, really all of my mates that I was swimming with were getting coaching jobs in Southern California, and I was kind of like living with a group of them in Newport Beach, and I just went and got a coaching job at Irvine Novas, which was a very strong club at the time, and a number of the coaches on the staff were all college friends of mine that I swam with growing up, and that's where I first started, and I kind of got the bug from there. And being an Australian citizen, I'd come back in 1985 and done a stint at the AIS for that, and that was back off the back of the '84 Olympic team. Was in the Bay Area where I was living, doing a camp and then competing. And I met them, and I was 15 and I was swimming really well. I got offered a scholarship there. My dad basically sent me off as a 16-year-old to Canberra. I didn't really want to go because I was a California kid. I didn't really think about going back. But it's through that relationship. We had the whole Olympic team at our house in 1984 for a barbecue. So Rob Woodhouse, who's now the CEO, I've known Rob for 40-odd years. Ron McKeon, Emma McKeon's dad. I go through the list of. I made my relationships with him. So when I was coaching in the early 90s, I started thinking maybe I want to go back to Australia. Sydney got the Olympics. Really, I was coaching 10-year-olds. I wasn't doing anything performance-wise. But I had this dream of running a swim school because I thought that's where you'll make your money. So I kind of just got on a plane. I really, to be honest, I got on a plane, came to Sydney, found a job through Greg Hodge, who ended up being one of the heads of Australian swimming at a time. And he gave me a job at Sutherland Leisure Centre, and I worked for him for a while. And then I headed down the south coast of New South Wales, ended up starting a swim school, and went from there, coached in the country, moved to Melbourne, back to where I started, Melbourne. Mum and Dad came back from the States. And I just kept coaching and running swim school, and I just had talent in the pool. And when you get talent in the pool, you get attracted to them winning, and you think, okay, where is this going to take me? And I got exposed to Bill Sweetenham and Don Talbot in the mid to late 90s when I came down, and I'd swum with Bill at the AIS, so he knew me, and he kind of took me under his wing and gave me, really good advice around coaching and encouraged me to go to Melbourne. Well, Don and him told me if I wanted to be a good coach, I should get it into the city, and I went to Melbourne. And that was it. Yeah, it just kind of went from there, and got exposed to the national team in 1999 and was on the national team most years through to Rio. But I never set out to be in this role, and I never set out to be – well, I did want to be involved in the Olympics, but I was really more about just having a job coaching and living that lifestyle of being a coach. That was my passion. I love the sport. I love from learn to swim. I still got to have a swim school. My wife runs a swim school in Melbourne. We still have – I'm across the whole sport, but while I have this opportunity, I'll keep doing it. But, I'll always be a swimming person, so it's just kind of followed the path. But, if you took me back at that moment where I got on the plane and come to Australia, thinking I wouldn't do it now, I'd never take that risk, but I was 24 years old, 25, I think.
Young adults. Yep.
25. And I was like, what the hell? I got nothing to lose. I'll go and see if I can make a fist of it.
And your relationship with swimming, has it always been strong? Is there points where you go, I'm done with this sport, I want to switch off and do something else?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Many times, you just get overwhelmed. Whether, as I said, when I, after Beijing, had great success. Liesl Jones had swum well there, and I was going to walk away from high performance and just go back to club coaching because I was like, oh, I've been there, done that. And then I got offered a role at Nauru and went there as a high performance coach. And then I'm employed to deliver performances internationally. And then all of a sudden, because previously I was doing it as a choice, like I was paying for it out of my own swim school. Now all of a sudden I'm employed in an organization to deliver high performance, and I really struggled through that period to really enjoy myself, because it was just like I felt like it was became real a focus. And so I thought, what else could I do here? It's not a fun place to be. And I always say to young coaches, if you want to be a high performance coach, just understand truly what it's about, and that's my message now is like, how can we support these young coaches who want to be high performance coaches? Because I lost a lot of time at home. I had a young family. I felt guilty because of that. You have strong relationships with your athletes and the families that you support them, and that's taxing. You have 10 athletes you're working with. 3 of them are struggling with something, and you're an empathy. Being an empathetic person, it really can take its toll. So I really had a bit of a down period. So I was probably thinking more in that kind of 2.9 to 2.12 about like, what am I doing? And probably, since then, there's different times where it's more, I think, when am I going to be done with this? Like, when am I going to move on to something else? And I don't know what something else is. That's the whole thing. And it was really my sister asked me the question, because after Paris, I was like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. Like that was the question I asked her. It's very, very important in my life, my sister. And she said, it's not about if you want to do it. It's if she said, no. I said, I don't know if I can do it. And she said, that's not the right question. The right question is, do you want to do it? I said, of course I want to do it. She said, well, then find out why you don't think you can do it. And that's when I really reflected really well and said, these are the things I don't like about being in, like any person has a job. There's certain things you go, I really don't like that. And it's like, well, is that something in my control or is that out of my control? And I really had a good look at that, and I've reset myself even better. I always believe you evolve every 4 to 5 years. You kind of have a shift in your evolution of who you are, particularly if you're listening and you're looking for ways. And that was a pivotal moment for me to go, yeah, now I want to do this, and I'm going to make sure that those things that I don't like, a lot of it was my own, the way I think and the way I process things more than anything. But there's been many times I can tell you, Chris, that I've thought, what else could I do here? Can I do something else? But I'm a lifer. I'm ashamed to say. Not ashamed to say. I should
not
say.
Ashamed to say. Not ashamed to say you're a lifer.
I've been swimming since I was 5 years old. I've been in the sport like from top to bottom, and it's a wonderful place to be.
Did you end up doing a little pros and cons on a spreadsheet one day, or a whiteboard, and just like tick, tick, tick? Actually, the pros outweigh the cons.
Well, I did with the person I work with, somebody who I've been working with for a long time. We just sat down and he did it for me. We kind of walked through it. Once I was asking myself the right question, and that's just been, and that's how I operate. I always surround myself with people who I can, as my dad used to say, surround yourself with people who tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. They're the ones that'll have your back when shit goes wrong. And that's so true. So I'm very much looking for feedback, and I have worked with somebody who's very, very good at that. Is a bit of a, kind of a mentor slash expert in the field of high performance. And we have great conversations. It keeps me focused on what is it that I do well. But yeah, it was something like that, the pros and cons, and eventually they'll tip and I'll be done. Maybe.
And yeah, maybe, or a lifer. Rohan, I assume that could have been your scoreboard moment when you sort of sat down and went, could I go this way or that way? And the moment is around something you vividly remember that has altered the course of your life. If it's not, have you got a scoreboard moment?
I think the scoreboard moment is probably when I decided to move to Australia and pursue coaching. I think I had a good job. I was coaching there. I just had this, I don't know, I had this image in my mind of living a certain lifestyle. And believe me, it wasn't this, by the way. It was more just having swimming be support me, having a family, all that thing. I remember my dad saying to me, because he wasn't supportive of me being a coach at the time. He was in corporate land. And I remember he said to me, coaching's not a real job. What are you doing? Why do you want to go to Australia? I said, I want to go. And I said, I'm going. And he supported me, of course. But it wasn't until I had another conversation with him, probably 7 or 8 years after that, when things were going really well, that I said to him, do you support what I'm doing? He said, of course I do. I'm your biggest fan. I said, but you told me it wasn't a real job. And I'd hung on to that for 7 years, feeling like I was doing something that wasn't legit. And it was because of a comment that was made. And I think that those two moments really made me, I think it probably freed me up when he said, no, I absolutely think this is the greatest thing for you. And I was like, thank you. So I'll probably just say that's one that sticks out in my mind.
Now, that's very interesting as a father of 3 kids now, that the little, just one thing you say can stick with the kids, and they're like, and the father or the parent might go, no, I actually didn't overly mean that. It was just kind of a flippant comment, but it stuck with you, right?
Yeah.
Rohan, your all-time favourite sporting moment, knowing that you've seen so many. So this is a pretty tricky question, I reckon.
Yeah, I think I can't go past the men's 4x1 free relay. I was a volunteer at the Sydney Olympics, so I was on the pool deck, literally 20 meters from that, and that was the first night of swimming. It was probably the biggest, and Thorpe won the 400. I think that moment, and knowing the history of the American dominance in men's relays, and just the storyline. And I'd done a camp with that crew before, we'd done a national event camp. So I've been with that group, and I knew what they were trying to achieve. That was pretty special moment. That was you kind of floated out of the building. So from a swimming perspective, there's other sporting moments. That's probably the one I'll stick with.
Excellent. What a moment that is. Now, in the previous podcast was Alistair Dobson, who was the general manager of the Big Bash in Australia, and his favourite moment was when the women's won the World Cup at the MCG in 2020 in front of a packed-out house, which is going to lead me to the Scoreboard Scramble, which is I'll give you 10 seconds to, and the number of points you can get is 7, right? And so what you're going to have to do in these 10 seconds is going to have to spell the word cricket backwards. Your time starts now.
TERKCIC.
Oh, you got in there, but it was TEKCIRC, and I think you said something else. We'll have to go back to the
TEKCIC.
I think you did it, but you might have said something else. Yeah, but anyway, it was a very valid effort, and you nailed it. So well done, Rohan.
That's a tough one. I like that.
Yeah, on the spot. So we're going to have to do the scoreboard scramble for the next guest about your scoreboard moment. I've got one final question for you, Rohan. I've got kids that are 12, 10 and 8 and they're loving sport and they're going out there, and we're in 2025 and the sporting professional era is changing by the day. What's some advice out there to boys and girls in their teenage years that want to be a high-performance swimmer or athlete?
Well, I think at that age, I think they need to be really doing a lot of different sports and exposing themselves. And I think the reason being is because that's where you develop skill, the really high-level skill acquisition and the capacity to learn. Specialization too early can become, I think, can really dull the opportunities. I think what we've seen historically is, in a lot of other sports, Patrick Mahomes, for instance, played baseball, basketball, football. He was multi-sport, and I think he talks about, and that's an extreme example, but he talks about his ability to make decisions on the field is based on his experience with other sports, and he's obviously the best at what he does. But I definitely know with swimming, athletes who come from regional country areas and come into the sport a little bit, they're very talented, but they're doing other sports, netball, cricket, football, and they actually have a broad athleticism that they come in. What that means is, what that skill set can help you with is, when you need to learn new things that are going to make that minute difference, you have this ability to learn and pick up information and apply it because you've been able to do that probably more implicitly than anything else. And I think that's the implicit learning. You're just picking up ways of doing things differently. Swimming's such a focused thing that from a swimming perspective, if you have more exposure to other things. So that's why we do a lot of cross training and dry land with the younger ones early. But I would suggest multi-sport involvement. That would be my number one thing. Be involved in multi-sports as long as you can before you specialize.
Rohan Taylor, National Head Coach of the Australian Swim Team, the Dolphins. Thank you so much for being on Scoreboard today to share your story around your background and the team itself, the highs and the lows and some of those scoreboard moments. I really do appreciate you taking the time out today, and all the best in the upcoming campaigns that you do, and also leading up to LA in 2028, and looking forward to following the progress. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it.